I used to think apartment buildings were the safest kind of living. You're surrounded by people, there's security, cameras, locked entrances, safety in numbers, right? That's what I told myself when I moved into a mid-sized building near the city. But safety is an illusion. And I learned that the hard way. It started small. My packages began disappearing. Not all of them, just one or two here and there. At first I figured they'd been delivered to the wrong unit. A hoodie I ordered never showed, then a book. I blamed the delivery guy, shrugged it off. But then it happened again, and again. Then came the laundry. Our building had a shared laundry room in the basement, and I'd use it late in the evenings when no one else was around. But I began noticing my clothes moved. They'd be slightly damp, or folded sloppily on top of the dryer when I came to pick them up. It wasn't consistent enough to prove anything, but it was enough to put me on edge. At first, I thought maybe it was just a rude neighbor. You know the type, impatient, entitled. But it didn't feel like that. It felt deliberate, like someone was trying not just to use the machines, but to interfere. Then came the night that changed everything. It was close to midnight, and I was walking my dog around the back alley behind the building. A storm was rolling in, the kind of cold, silent pressure you feel before rain hits. That's when I noticed the light in the basement stairwell was flickering. I'd lived in the building for 6 months and had never seen it on, not once. I assumed maybe maintenance had been working late, but something felt off. I kept walking, trying not to think too much about it, but my dog, usually unfazed by anything, stopped in his tracks. His ears perked. He let out a low growl and pulled back on the leash. That's when I heard it too. Movement, heavy, slow, just inside the basement door, not like pipes clanging or the scurrying of rats. This was something breathing, something alive. And then he appeared. A man shuffled out from the shadows at the bottom of the stairs. His face was pale, dirty. His clothes hung off his frame like they didn't belong to him. I froze, too stunned to speak. He looked up at me, just for a moment, and then turned and slipped back into the dark without saying a word. I barely remember getting back to my apartment. I locked the door, turned off all the lights, and sat on my bed with my heart pounding. I told myself I'd imagined it, that maybe he was just some random homeless guy who snuck in to get warm. But deep down, I knew better. The next day I went to the building manager, asked if anyone was working in the basement the night before. She looked puzzled, said no one had been scheduled, said the basement was locked after 9 p.m. I pushed, told her what I saw. She shrugged and said, probably someone who snuck in. But it didn't stop. Over the next week, I started hearing noises in the hallway at night. Not on my floor, deeper, below. Footsteps, shuffling, once even what sounded like whispering. The laundry room light would be on at odd hours. The back alley motion lights would flicker with no one in sight. One night, I left a broom propped against the basement stairwell door, just to see. The next morning, it was gone. That's when I bought a cheap motion camera and hid it behind a potted plant near the basement entrance. I set it to record from midnight to 5 a.m. I almost didn't want to look at the footage the next day, but curiosity got the better of me. At exactly 3:14 a.m., a man emerged from the basement, calm, slow. He didn't rush. He didn't look around like someone who wasn't supposed to be there. He moved like he belonged. And then he stopped. He looked directly at the camera. Not a glance. He stared for a full 10 seconds, and then he smiled. I called the police, showed them the footage. They took it seriously this time. Officers arrived, searched the entire basement. It took them hours. In the farthest corner, hidden behind discarded furniture and old paint cans, they found it. A makeshift bed, a pile of wrappers, bottles, a burner phone, and a notebook. Inside the notebook were lists, floor numbers, descriptions of tenants, routines, What time people left for work, what nights they did laundry, what they ordered from Amazon, including me. He had been living in the basement for weeks, maybe months, slipping in and out while we slept, watching us. The police believe he left the night he noticed the camera. They never found him. They think he escaped through the alley exit before they arrived. But the fear never left. I check my locks 3 times now. I keep my windows shut. I installed another camera, inside my apartment this time, because something about his face in that footage, his calm, deliberate movements, his eyes locked on mine through the lens, made me feel like he wasn't done. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, always around 3:14 a.m., and sometimes I swear I hear something moving beneath the floorboards. When I first moved into my new apartment, it felt like everything had finally aligned. Rent was cheap, the location was ideal, and the place, while small, had a kind of charm to it. It was on the 2nd floor of a 3-story walk-up, tucked between 2 older buildings on a narrow street that felt quiet, almost hidden from the rest of the city. My window faced directly across an alleyway to another apartment building. It was older than mine, brick exterior, faded green shutters. Most of the windows were always closed and covered with blinds or curtains, all except one. The first night I noticed it, I had just finished unpacking and was sitting on my couch, enjoying the stillness. That's when I saw a faint glow across the way. A single window with the blinds halfway open and a soft yellow light glowing inside. I could just make out a figure standing behind the glass. He was tall. That was all I could see at first. He stood still, facing directly toward my apartment. I assumed he was just up late, maybe watching TV or pacing. I thought nothing of it. But the next night he was there again. Same window, same position, not moving. By the 3rd night I was starting to feel uneasy. The light turned on at almost exactly the same time, 2:04 a.m. The man would appear minutes later. He never moved, never swayed or shifted. He just stood there, facing my window like he was watching me, even though I never left my blinds fully open after that first night. I started to develop a routine. I'd peek between the slats, heart racing, and every time, I'd see him there. Silent, motionless, like a statue with intent. What unsettled me most wasn't that he stared. It was that he never looked away. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that maybe he was just strange. Maybe he liked standing there. Maybe it was just some weird guy with insomnia. But that didn't explain the feeling that kept creeping over me. That creeping sense of being watched, not in passing, but studied, like something was trying to learn me. I started keeping my lights off at night. I stopped walking past the window, but the fear didn't go away. It settled in my bones. Eventually, I brought it up to the landlord. I made a joke out of it, called the guy my midnight neighbor, tried to keep it casual, but her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She stopped smiling. Her face fell. "What unit?" she asked. I pointed. "That apartment's been empty for months." I thought she was messing with me, but she wasn't. She looked visibly shaken. The previous tenant, she told me, had died. Some kind of accident, though she didn't go into detail. The place had been sealed ever since. No one had gone in or out. Only she had the key. That night, I stayed up. I didn't even try to sleep. And sure enough, just after 2 a.m., the light came on, and the man appeared. I recorded it. I took photos. My hands were shaking, but I needed to have proof. I watched through my camera screen as he stood there, facing me. But when I played the footage back, nothing. No light, no man, just me. my window, my reflection. I didn't know what else to do. I became obsessed. I started watching every night, hoping to catch something. I barely left the apartment. I barely ate. I was spiraling and I knew it. But I couldn't let it go. I had to know what was happening. So I did something I probably shouldn't have. The next day, I waited until a delivery guy entered the building across the alley. I slipped in behind him, pretending to be a resident. I climbed the stairs, trying not to breathe too loudly. The hallway was silent. Old carpet. Faint smell of mildew. I walked slowly until I reached the door I had seen the man in. It was locked, sealed with police tape. But through the peephole, I saw it. The inside was empty. No furniture, no signs of life. Just a single wooden chair, facing the window. And on the windowsill, like a final, quiet scream, was a photo, a printed picture of me, standing in my own apartment. That was the last night I stayed there. I packed everything the next morning and left without telling anyone. I broke my lease. I didn't care. Because even now, when I think about that chair, about that photo, I still feel like he's watching me. Wherever I go, whatever window I look out of. We moved to the neighborhood because it was quiet, peaceful, the kind of place where people waved from their porches and dogs barked lazily from behind fences. After years of city noise, it felt like paradise. Our next-door neighbor was a mystery, an older man who rarely left his house. You'd see the lights on, but never anyone at the windows. His lawn was perfectly kept, his mailbox never overflowing, but no one ever saw him. Until one day, a mail carrier knocked on our door. "Just a heads up," he said. "If you see anything weird next door, don't go over there." I asked what he meant. He hesitated, then said, "That house, it's been vacant for years." I thought he was mistaken. I told him I'd seen the man, waved at him, heard him mowing the lawn. He just shook his head. "You might have waved, but no one waved back." That night I stayed up, watching the house. Around 2 a.m., the porch light flicked on. A figure stepped out. Same man I'd seen before, tall, thin, walking with slow, deliberate movements. He moved to the edge of the lawn, then stopped, and turned to look directly at our house. I stepped back from the window. He stood there for several minutes before slowly turning back and walking inside. The light went off. The next day, I walked over. The windows were dusty. Cobwebs lined the porch. I knocked. No answer. I looked in through the window. The living room was empty, completely bare. No furniture, no lights, no sign of life. But the grass was still freshly mowed. I haven't seen him since. But some nights I still hear the sound of a lawnmower starting up. Even when it's raining, even when it's past midnight. And every time it does, I check the window. Because something tells me he's still out there, waiting.